But we'll see. Thank you very much. Afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025. And this is your General Housing Committee. This afternoon, we're going to have a walkthrough and markup of S127. S127.
Nope. Oh, you're right. Oh my God, sorry. Sorry.
That's okay. I thought, oh my God, what didn't I know?
Wrong.
Of S127, which is S127 is the Senate analog to our committee housing bill. The Senate has our housing bill, and we now have their housing bill. There are portions of their housing bill which we are not going to spend a lot of time on today. Specifically, the portions of their housing bill that deal with tax increment financing are over in House Commerce. And House Commerce is hearing those issues, and when they are done, they will provide. When they're done, they'll provide those to us. Also, I have spoken with the chair of House Environment, and she is taking a hard look at the development dirt portion of the brownfield section. If it's heard, has to be heard by their committee, just like Commerce is hearing it. I don't know what we know. We've talked a lot to Commerce. We know what they're doing. And in fact, Ashley has been kind of our delegate over there and will be our delegate over there. So when she walks out, that's what she's doing most of the time. And I don't know what's happening with the development dirt concepts yet. I haven't circled back with the chair. So what we're going to do today is go through the bill and look at the differences between what's in that bill and what's in our bill and discuss them. One of the sections of this bill deals with the same subject matter, which is in H169. That's the act that relates to discrimination in public accommodation and housing based on nationality or national origin or nationality and citizenship and immigration status. We can look at those sections so we know what are in them, but I think that what we will do after we talk about the S127 markup and walk through is we're going to take up H169 for a preliminary discussion of where we're at on H169. I have a feeling that once we do that, we can circle back and figure out what we're going to do with the language in the Senate bill. We have with us today, of course, our illustrious legislative counsel, Cameron Wood, who will be helping us as we walk through the bill. So Cameron, do you want to take the lead here and we'll start through it?
I'll be more than happy to. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. Very, very bold of Magali a minute ago.
Retiring.
Right. So what I have is sharing the screen, S127. This is the unofficial version as passed by the Senate. It's available, on the legislature's webpage. You also all have the side-by-side if you want to reference back to, something that came out of your bill, H479. I'm simply going to walk through this document as we're discussing. There are a few things that I would like to point out, some slight errors that I've made that, I would ask that the committee potentially change or rectify. And there's a few other things that have come up since the last time we discussed the bill that I wanted to make sure and get in front of the committee.
On the side, but let's just clarify. The side by side, which you all have many of you in hard copy, the side by side is also available on our website. Where would people find it? Under a date
I'm
or
gonna repost it under today.
it'll be reposted soon in the next minutes under today's date, if you want to follow along, because the side by side is very useful.
Okay, so S-127, this is page 1, the section 1, Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program. This is VHIP. I think you all are at this point pretty, familiar with the program and most of the changes that we've made. I'm going to kind of move us directly to the primary differences between your bill and the Senate version, which is going to be here on page 2, the unofficial version. As you all recall, you kept the opportunity for 5-year forgivable loans, whereas the Senate has removed them.
You know what? Can I ask you to go back? Can we go to the very beginning? According to your side, I mean, it's picky, but this is where we have to resolve the picky stuff, okay? So forgive me, but we're gonna get detailed here. Under 5B,
Yes, sir.
we've had entities carrying out the provisions of this section. And they don't.
And I'm just going to bring that up so everybody's got it in front of them. Okay, so this is in 5B, as Mr. Chair, you were mentioning. The 5B is adding this language that was at the request of the administration to ensure that it's clear that the entities that are actually loaning out money under the program, because if you recall, money goes from DHCP, can be given to nonprofit or other housing organizations. It's then loaned out or granted out to, individual property owners for rehabilitation of those units, and wanting to clarify that for the purposes of loaning those dollars, these entities are not considered licensed lenders under Vermont law.
So can we, I think with leave of the committee, our language addition is a superior item there and should be included.
There are a few things that if you are amending or giving leave for me to draft you an amendment to this section, I would probably do a little bit of combination of these two. In that, technically having subdivision 5 there, I believe is more appropriate for our editing and drafting style. So I would be incorporating that. But I agree, I don't exactly recall when this came in. But I agree that I think it helps be even more explicitly clear. So I'm happy to add your section back in.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Have we decided which bill is going to move forward, either the House or the Senate?
What I have done is talk to leadership here, and they'd like it to be the House bill. What I haven't done is talk to the chair of and so I have to still circle back on that. So I think for the moment, we should just assume I hope by the end of today, we'll know the language changes that we make to the Senate bill. And if we have to convert that into language changes in the House bill, we'll be able to do that pretty easily.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, so keep the House version of this subdivision specifically. Okay. Okay.
If we end up changing its location, we can do it. Yeah.
Okay, so moving through, as you will recall, the D1A, these changes are similar. So I'm going to keep it on the side by side at this point. Probably good to just continue to work off this document. So bringing us to the primary difference between the two versions here, where, as I mentioned a second ago, the House version is keeping the 5-year forgivable loans. The Senate version is removing the option for 5-year forgivable loans. I was just looking in my scramble to come over here. I left some documents on my desk. I went back and I was looking at how VHIP had kind of changed over time. And, originally, I was just looking at this on Friday, so it's been a few days, but my recollection is that there wasn't a distinction between the 5-year and the 10-year and the grants. They were just grants or loans. And then over time, these things have been added in, specifically calling out grants or 5-year forgivable loans versus the 10-year forgivable loans. And so, this is really for your committee's discussion here, because this is one of the primary differences in this section between you and the Senate. But if you all recall, you can get a grant or a 5-year loan, in which case the parameters apply where you have to then lease the unit out to an individual who falls within one of those populations, exiting homelessness, refugee resettlement, etc. Or the 10-year loan, which now there's amending that to go back to what it was initially when the language was first created, to authorize those loans to simply provide for rent that is capped at fair market rent.
But it's just striking the 5-year forgivable loans. There's still 5-year grants available, and those 5-year grants would still be servicing those populations, correct?
If you want to refer it to a 5-year grant, yes. I mean, it's a grant that you would then be required to comply with the requirements, the provision for a minimum of 5 years. Yes.
My memory is, I think where this comes down is, I think that we can use the Senate language. And here's my understanding of it. My understanding of it is the grants and loans thing isn't important. What's important is there's a 5-year program without a homelessness requirement, with a homelessness requirement, and there's a 10-year program without it. That's the key. When we asked about why the administration struck the forgivable loans, they just did it because they never use them. In the 5-year program, they just do grants. They don't do forgiveness. They just don't do it. And so this was just language to conform to their practice. We left it in just so they'd have the option. But if they don't want the option, why leave it in? I guess that's my feeling. I don't think it's about changing the nature of the 5-year program or the 10-year program in any basic way. It just so happens the way they run the 5-year program is with grants, and the way they run the 10-year program is with loans. I think that's my understanding of it. Does that?
Yes.
So
I think we could use the Senate one if they wanted to. Yes.
But why
Why close it?
yeah, what's wrong with just leaving it in?
No, there's nothing wrong with it either way. What's the pleasure of the committee? You want to leave it our language or their language? The only difference is that in the 5-year program, it just leaves the option of forgivable loan in which the agency says they don't use.
Of course not.
So-
I mean, of course they don't, but it doesn't. If nobody's using it, clearly it's not creating any kind of inconvenience for them.
Right.
So then,
With Rep. Burrows on this one.
Okay,
I would say leave it in for now. I brought the question up with regard to tax liability between one or the other.
Sure.
I don't think there's enough difference to really worry about.
well,
Yeah, right.
it's true that for a private party, the advantage of the loan is they don't have to pay taxes.
unless it's forgiven, at which point I think they do.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it is, of course, it's forgiven incrementally, so it's not, the liability is spread out over.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But it's still there.
Okay, the committee census of the committee is let's go with the House version.
Okay.
Okay,
Next thing I would ask then is what about this subdivision 4 on your side by side? So this is language that was added by the Senate. This is for grants, or if you kept the House version, the forgivable loans, 5-year. And it is adding a subpopulation among the group of populations where the landlord has to lease the unit. So it'll be a household that is displaced due to activity related to climate change or due to a natural disaster.
The discussion, a couple of questions. And let's recall some discussion. The first question I have is, does anybody know what the agency thinks of this?
Well, in my asking, they seemed like natural disaster was a pretty simple one to understand.
But you also made the point that climate change maybe wasn't.
But I think I asked the question and they said it wasn't.
So what's the sense of the committee here? I see 3 options. 1, we leave it in and go with the Senate version. 2, we take it out because we didn't think of it, so the hell with them. Or 3, we could just say natural disaster.
Grace,
Okay, you have a question or statement?
No, I was gonna say, I would prefer 3. I know Rep. Burrows had brought it up and I had originally been against it, mostly because I didn't feel like I had enough information, and I'm hopeful that the other body did. So I would prefer 3.
How did I bring it up?
Didn't you bring this up?
I think it was Rep. Parsons who brought it up.
There was.
Sure.
We discussed this, was it not?
I think it was Gail.
No. Oh my God, no, we took a straw poll on it.
Well, but it's in the Senate, not
No.
ours.
I know, and I remember the straw poll. I remember I was against it because I didn't have enough information.
Against the climate or the disaster? Or any of it?
Was it not on VHIT? Didn't you want to be?
You know what, my memory is we discussed the general concept of expanding things in some way to deal with natural disaster, and I remember that you were talking about it, but I don't think it was this actual
Okay.
phrase. Is the sense of the committee that we should just go with displaced due to an activity related to a natural disaster other than climate change or? Okay, that's where we are. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
all right, is that where we are?
isn't that just about the same thing?
Well,
I mean, it becomes the agency's problem if we leave it in there. But what climate change situation are we talking about that's not a natural disaster? And an island in the Pacific slips under the waves finally and they move here in the apartment, or what? I'm just trying to picture,
man, where I laugh is really sad. Okay, go on.
sorry. I'm just trying to picture how this functions in a way that just natural disaster like doesn't function perfectly well.
Yes,
Natural disaster.
I like natural disaster.
Yeah, I think the climate change one is a bit broad
It's
and
hard to define.
undefinable, as has been stated. And
Okay.
also, that island might not slip under, it could capsize. It's so brilliantly brought up. before. But the writing of it, displaced due to activity.
I would recommend you remove. If that's what the committee would like to do, I would recommend you just state displaced due to a natural disaster.
how about that, folks? Okay, done.
Okay. So then. we're gonna get to, this is page 3 of the side by side, and here's where I'm going to comment to the committee, something I found on Friday. This is in subsection F, so this is the change for the 10-year forgivable loans, where, as you all recall, we're striking all of this language, and it would subsequently require that the landlord lease the unit where total cost of the rent, including utilities not covered by rent payments, shall not exceed the applicable fair market rent established by Department of Housing and Urban Development. Except that a landlord may accept a housing voucher that exceeds fair market rent if available.
Right.
And when I was reviewing this language again, I noticed that we're striking, and again, as I was reviewing the language of the program as it was originally conceived and then its amendments over time, I realized that we were striking this language in 1. Nope, excuse me. Not where I was thinking. Here we go. Sorry. Subdivision 3. Singing the first subdivision under it, but no, not 1, subdivision 3.
Page 4.
Page 4. Yes, sir. A landlord shall accept any housing vouchers that are available to pay all or a portion of the tenant's rent and utilities.
Shouldn't have been struck.
So, right, so my question was, why are we striking that? It seems not to be in alignment with everything that I've heard about the program. And so I reached out to the administration just to confirm, hey, just I want to make sure, because this was in their language. I wasn't sure if this was just an oversight or if this is actually your intention. The response I got back was no, probably just a little bit of oversight. The intention was not to remove that. Their comment was, it is arguably illegal for a landlord to specifically not accept housing vouchers. One would argue that could be discriminatory under the Fair Housing Act. But they were not intending to, kind of remove that language in statute. So I'm bringing it up to the committee in case it's something that you all would like to add back in. So again, you have the language, this is where I was in 1, sorry. You have it that the landlord may accept housing vouchers that exceed fair market rent, but, there was this specific call out in statute saying that the landlord shall accept them. Yeah, and I think it's arguable that they're required to anyway, but that doesn't prohibit us in many instances of calling it out specifically. So I'm mentioning it to you all in case you want to add it back in.
Would love to.
I agree.
Agreed. So we're gonna leave in 3A, which says it says all or a portion of, and this other one just says they can accept it if it's greater. Yeah.
I will, make sure they're organized correctly, but yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a detailed question? And something that just caught my eye on the previous page, under, we're in 1, on page 3, number 1, middle of the page. The total cost of rent for the unit, including utilities not covered by rent payments, shall not exceed the applicable fair market rent established by HUD. So when HUD sets fair market rent, do they account for the cost of utilities? Or if you have a tenant that plugs in 8 electric heaters in the middle of the winter, the cost of utilities.
It's a good question. I do not know the answer off the top of my head. I will want.
Okay, well, I feel better just knowing that. Is it, I don't. Did that strike you as that? Okay.
Chad Simmons from Housing Finance Agency. I don't have the answer to that. I don't believe so, but I can double check and find out.
Why don't we just leave it that we have to run that, that's to be run down, okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll find out from, Cameron. Unfortunately, I have to leave the room right now.
Okay, I'm gonna make a note and I will do some research and we'll get back.
Hi, Chad.
Okay, so we are now to the other, difference coinciding with the keeping of the 5-year forgivable loans. And so I'm assuming if you're, well, I shouldn't assume, even if you were getting rid of the 5-year, you may want to keep this, the minimum set aside. So as you recall, you have in the House version, the bill that came out of this committee, there's the minimum set aside for the grants and 5-year forgivable loans. Annually established, has to be at least 30%. Department consults with Agency of Human Services on, the capacity of establishing them and whether that should be above 30%. Funds after 1 year can become available for the 10-year loans, et cetera. This is language that was in your bill, not in the Senate bill.
Right, and it goes on, if you wanna grow up a little. Yeah, it goes on to require reporting,
Yes, sir. I was getting that next, yes, but you have the reporting in J.
right? This was just to refresh your memories. Remember, we asked Vermont Housing and Community Development, we asked them to please, in return for taking out all of the provisions dealing with the requirement to house the homeless for the 10-year loan, to address the problem and the concern that we were worried that no one would do the 5-year loan. And they came back with this language. We talked over in committee saying, can you put a number on it? And that's where the 30% came from. And then we talked, when we went to Human Services Committee under the leadership of Teresa Wood, they said we'd sure like some reporting, and we agreed on this language, and we ran this language by the department, and they were okay with all. So this is the compromise. The Senate did not, they just didn't have this in front of them when they did their bill. I think they would be perfectly okay with it, although we'll see. But I would personally support keeping this language in as an essential part of the sort of whole balance that we struck. How does the committee feel?
I'm good keeping it.
No comment at the moment.
Keeping it.
Well, for the next draft, let's keep it in.
I will circle back to the question from Representative Charlton. Yes, fair market rent typically includes utilities. That's just the initial answer. There's probably a lot of detail on how that's calculated that I will still try to get to, but just the immediate answer that I'm getting from HUD is yes. And then there's a
Do
specific.
you have someone at HUD who actually responds to your?
Nope, this is me just doing research right here on the fly. That's why I have multiple devices.
Well, and also Chad's out there looking, so
So, I'll dig into that further because I'm sure there's, this piece that I'm looking at here says there are certain things that are excluded. So, and I'm sure there's probably a calculation of how that works. So, okay.
that takes care of, does that take care of the?
Well, no, I was just gonna, on the renter, L42, whatever that renter rebate form is, if somebody gets subsidized and we have to say how much rent they paid, we have to take out, like if we supplied heat, we have to subtract heat, snow plowing, trash removal from that figure. That might be a different definition of what HUD uses.
Might be. It's, I assume I've heard of the HUD definition as its own thing. Does that complete
That completes VIA.
section 1? Okay,
And I'm assuming we can complete section 2 relatively quickly because
there are no
They are the
changes.
same.
No changes. Is there, well, unless there is a typo.
section 2.
Yeah, I think so, isn't it? Section A, B, C, D, D to C.
Yes, you're talking about section 3. Yes, sir. So section 2 is the manufactured home improvement and repair program.
No, I'm talking about,
You're talking about the infrastructure sustainability fund.
oh, I'm sorry, you're right. No, there's nothing. Okay, yes, you're right.
So you have the opportunity to amend the section further if you so choose, if anything has come up since you passed the bill previously. So I'll just pause. Unless you want me to move on. Okay. So section 3 is the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Funds. And yes, sir, as you mentioned, I'm on page 8 of this side by side. There is a typo in both versions of the bill. So D, these are program parameters, and then it lists under D2 the eligible activities. And under C, it should be the construction of municipal water and wastewater systems, waste and wastewater systems. So that is error on our part and one that I'm ask your leave to fix.
Any objections? Nope. Great.
Okay, so the change or the only difference here is the Senate kept the ranking of the community on the Vermont Department of Finance and Management Vermont Community Index as part of the application criteria that they would look at.
Yeah, and refreshing the community's memory. That one, what happened is we had a discussion amongst committee members. And a number of people, including myself, had negative experience with the ranking as being not accurate and sort of data driven. Algorithms that were questionable, and so we took it out after some discussion. The Senate didn't have the same discussion, I assume, and consequently just left it in. It was originally in the bill as written, as proposed by the administration. That's all I can tell you.
You go ahead.
Nope.
Oh, can anybody explain to me, because I'm ignorant of why this might be important?
I don't think it's okay, I'm trying to be
Important or
objective here.
useful?
Or either one.
It's, does anybody else besides me have experience with this?
Yes,
Say your piece.
our town received money because we fall in that category under the group.
Under
They're
a high ranking or low ranking?
a low ranking.
Oh, so
So we are-
it's a boost up towns with low ranking? I'm
Yeah.
ignorant. I'm
I
asking.
believe it was SMRF grants that were dealt out based on, I think they use the same ranking.
Or municipal,
Energy resilience, I don't know. I think it's SMRF though, is the.
Community resilience.
It's for energy, upfits for town buildings and things like that, or. But I believe, from we were reached out to by our, RPC. Saying, hey, you guys fit in the category of somebody who would probably get money if you applied for it. If you'd like to. I believe this is the ranking they use, underserved town.
Okay, so this is to boost underserved town.
That's my understanding of it.
what this was, is that there was an administration proposal in the last biennium
Uh-huh.
to spend a couple of $1 million to try to help towns that didn't otherwise have the staff capability get ARPA
Yeah.
and other federal grants.
Right.
And the way that the administration administered it was to create a computer generated an algorithm, a kind of a system, computer-based system to rank all the towns according to how needy they were in terms of staff capability, et cetera. There was a lot of pushback that the list was, while the formula might have been fine, the results were a little crazy. In my particular case, one community that had nobody home and desperately needed help didn't rate very well, while another community that had been very successful in getting grants rated very well. And so it was strange. That's about all I can tell you.
So as such, I don't think that just a comment on strictly on the language. I don't even see, like glancing through the context of the Senate's version of the bill, it still isn't clear whether the ranking is prioritizing or deprioritizing or what the purpose of it is. And so my preference would be to either take it out or add more descriptive language.
I'm wondering if there's more than one index. Easy to confuse. I looked this up at some point to try to find the index, and what I'm finding now isn't what I found before. And it seems like there are indices that are for technical assistance and energy issues that rate at the top are the ones who need the assistance the most, and there are others that seem to be geared along the experience and the readiness of a community to handle funds, and they have the stronger communities at the top. And I think I'm seeing two different things in two different places. So it may just need to be clearer about what index are we talking about. Because I'm not even sure that I'm looking at the same thing. I know this is not what I found before last time I looked for it.
I'd also love to know whether there's a tie-in at all between this, the Vermont Department of Finance Management, Vermont Community Index, and I know it's under the heading of community sustainability. I think it was infrastructure sustainability, but I wonder if there's a way to tie that in with like flood resiliency stuff. Because those indices might be completely different.
Right. The question, I think, we're facing a logistic question here. I see three options. One is to take it out because we don't like it or don't know what it is. The second is to leave it in because it's just one of 5 criteria, and that if it turns out to be not particularly useful to the bond bank, they'll ignore it. Or 3, take more testimony. In other words, I don't know, is there another way we could find out more about?
I personally would prefer to get more testimony simply because I don't know enough about this, and I think it would be helpful in our work as a committee and as a whole.
I believe Michael Gahn is scheduled to testify tomorrow in a sister committee at 10:30. Well, yes, sir. Whether you can
Please amend, yeah.
ask his availability around.
If he knows, well, Magali stepped out, so
We'll look at our schedule and
we'll look at our schedule. Yeah,
I am firmly against option number 2.
which is leaving it in?
Leaving it in, and
No.
because it could be buffered by the other ones.
Yeah, okay.
Either we leave it in and we're doing it because we know what its purpose. In other words, I guess I'm for option number 3. Take more testimony and then figure out whether we want to leave it in or not.
Okay, Magali. It is the sense of the committee, which I'm taking from several people who've spoken and other nodding heads, that if you look at page 9 of the side-by-side, you will see that it's up there.
Yes.
It's the ranking of the community on the Vermont Department of Finance and Management Vermont Community Index. It is the sense of the committee that we have to take a little testimony to find out what that means. And one person who might know that is Michael Bone. And I think you should ask him if he knows anything about it, because he is going to be testifying in House Commerce tomorrow. And the question is, could he stop by? But I don't know if he's the right person. I know the person who started it is a man whose name I have forgotten, but I know him well. He's the flood czar and the ARPA czar. Come on.
Just Farnham.
Yes, Farnham. He's the one who, under whom this was administered and created. So if Michael doesn't know, Farnham would.
Sorry, what section is it? It's
It's
Section 3.
section,
3.
no,
4.
Section 4.
section 4,
4.
H,
This one's-
no, section 4. No, he's right. It's section 3.
Yeah, flood.
Yeah, section 3, H.
3 subsection F. 4.
F4, right, I'm reading. Okay.
And for the record, was H 461 that I was talking about earlier, so please disregard everything I've said. Driving me? Absolutely.
Okay, leaving this in for now, and you're going to continue to take testimony on its inclusion. The remainder of that section is the same. So unless there's a desire to deep dive on it, I'm gonna move on to the next section, which is gonna be section 5 of the. Actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm
Yeah,
gonna.
let's do section 4 of us.
And let's switch back to the actual.
What we have here, ladies and gentlemen, are two different studies. And they're actually quite different. Section 4 in our bill was the Residential Universal Design Standards Study Committee,
Yes.
which was designed to try to get consensus amongst the relevant parties, mostly agencies, as to what universal design means.
And then, as you can see on the side by side, which is section 5 in the Senate bill, their proposal is to have a state housing and residential services planning committee. And so I'm gonna, spend a little time, just mentioning the creation and then the duties here. So it's a state housing and residential services planning committee to generate a state plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. I believe you all had testimony on this topic late last week. We have membership here, one member of the House, one member of the Senate, Secretary of AHS, Commissioner of Dale, Commissioner of Department of Housing and Community Development, State Treasurer, one member appointed by the Development Disabilities Housing Initiative, the Executive Director of the Vermont Development Disabilities Council, one member appointed by the Green Mountain Self Advocates, one member appointed by Vermont Care Partners, one member appointed by the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Moving into the next page, so the powers and duties, so the committee shall create an actionable plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities that reflects the diversity of needs expressed by those individuals and their families, including individuals with high support needs who require 24-hour care and those with specific communication needs. And then it has specifics of what that plan must include. So a schedule for the creation of at least 600 additional units, number and description of support needs of individuals with developmental disabilities anticipated to be served, anticipated funding needs, and recommendations for changes in state laws or policies that are obstacles to the development of housing needed by individuals with Medicaid-funded home and community-based services. Subsection D is for purpose of scheduling meetings and preparing recommended legislation. The committee shall have the assistance of the Office of Legislative Operations and the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm gonna pause here. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect timing.
Perfect time.
I emailed Susan earlier this morning and she was very quick to respond. And do you want to speak on this or? I'll let you speak because you're here, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, for the record, Susan Aronoff, Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. And I understand that legislative council cannot serve in that role. So my recommendation would be that the commissioner from the Department of Housing and Human Services, Alex Carroll, for his designee, served in that role.
That was one, there are three issues here. One is just the big issue. This is a whole new study. I'm just playing fair here. This is a whole new study, which was proposed by the Senate. We took testimony. And we had testimony on this just a few days ago. That's one. I mean, theoretically, we could reject the entire study. We could accept the entire study. The second are some details about the study. One is, which was just mentioned by Susan, right?
Yes.
Which is, we were alerted to the fact that paragraph D, the last paragraph, that it's really not appropriate to look to the legislative council for this. Or for that matter, operations. So one is a proposal that we substitute Department of Housing and Community Development. The second one is a request that came into me orally from Gus Seelig. And I guess Susan then provided language, which is that we asked the department, as part of this study, the Department of Aging and Independent Living, Dale, to provide geographic information on where these people are and what their respective needs are, so that it would be easier to convert it into to operationalize it, knowing where they are. And Susan sent language to that effect, which you have. Those are the issues. Do we want to study? Do we feel we could go with it? And what about those two details? Yes.
While not always super gung ho about a study, I think both studies are very different, but I think there is a need for both of them, and I would be supportive of keeping both studies in here. I think as we talk about housing, it's important that we address that not everybody's housing needs are the same. And when we're talking about housing and developing housing, I think we need to understand how to make it more accessible for everybody. So that's just my personal preference.
Yes.
I agree with what Representative Bartley just said, but I would add that as I communicated to somebody else this weekend and copied you on the communication, I think it's really important to have somebody with lived experience in each of these committees. And I wondered whether there is a way to ensure that through the 600 minutes committee.
Well, the only lived experience that I can say with respect to the Committee on Disability Housing for the DDI housing is that's one of the members of the committee are the parents.
It is, the parents are in this list?
And if I may, Mr. Chair, Green Mountain Self Advocates, which is a internationally recognized organization of leaders with lived experience, is also in the list of people who would be on the committee for the developmental disability housing group. I can't speak to the other group. I know that the Developmental Disabilities Council is in the other group. And we are a council that's made up of 60% of people with lived experience, family members who are.
Okay.
I don't know who we would have filling that spot.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Other thoughts on the committee, we've had two people speak that we should have both studies. And how do people feel about that? And how do people feel about the substitution of Vermont Housing and Community Development as the staff and the Dale language?
I agree with both.
We okay on that?
Yes, so.
Do you feel that you have clear direction?
But yes, I was just gonna make one comment, you could also have Dale be the one staffing the committee, in which case you don't need to then direct them to provide information separate. I don't know which is best, DHCD or Dale, so I would defer to others on what would be more appropriate. I'm just saying, if you had it as Dale, you don't need to then add separate language that Dale has to give a presentation because they're the ones
I
staffing.
think the Department of Housing and Community Development would be best.
Okay.
And I think that, so we're gonna keep both. I do want to alert the committee that in the Senate, there was at least some discussion of combining these studies. And the problem that a number of people pointed out, including one of our august members, really are apples and oranges in terms of what they're trying to do.
Well, they were talking about that was a different study though, right?
I thought it was not.
That Senator Clarkson was talking about.
Was
She was not talking about this.
Oh, she wasn't?
No, she was
She was
talking
talking about
about
the code study.
the code study.
They mentioned both.
Yeah.
I believe the initial question was, could these two be the same? And there was discussion about they really are looking at two different things. And then after further discussion, it was brought to their attention that there is currently a committee that is ongoing now, looking at residential and
Right,
commercial
right.
building codes. And so
Right.
now they've shifted a little bit of whether or not it makes sense to incorporate that into that ongoing study committee. And Rep Burrows, I think she's been in contact with you on that.
Oh, yes.
She mentioned that on the record, so that's what I'm saying.
Also, this is just for committee information.
Mhm.
You should know that Scott Campbell, Representative Campbell, he's the person who has been involved in the study of building codes now for quite a while. And is very deeply enmeshed in it, and he sent a long email to the chair of the Senate Housing and Finance and Housing. And said they really shouldn't be combined. What they'll do, I don't know.
Okay, this committee would like to keep both
Yes,
and changing the Senate committee to have the HCD staffing it. And then also including language directing Dale to provide them with the information necessary in the language that was provided.
correct. There is the question of compensation.
That is where I was gonna go next, which is when you look at subsection G, this is on page 12 of the side-by-side. So this committee had specific language which provided compensation to both legislative members and individuals who were not otherwise paid for their time. It was then amended by the House Appropriations Committee to say that the compensation is only available if it is funded through the budget. It was funded by the House. So the $15,000 for the Universal Design Study Committee was included in the budget. If you're okay with it, I would recommend keeping the language as is because it's not clear what the Senate is going to do. And so then if you're okay with that, I think that leaves it as far as if there's any change that this committee would like to make in regards to the compensation of the committee on the Senate side. The Senate did not provide any compensation. I should say it was simply removed by the Senate Appropriations Committee at that time because they did not have possession of the budget bill. It had not passed the House. Had to make crossover just as yours did. So, you know, I can't speak to / it's not clear whether the Senate Appropriations Committee would put in reimbursement for that committee and to what extent the Senate Economic Development Committee is going to strongly advocate for it. I do not know. So that leads me to my question, which is, I can bring it over straight as it passed the Senate side, or just keep it in exactly as it passed and just not say anything as it relates to compensation, Mr. Chair, if that's what you would like.
Do you have, if we use, well, wouldn't we want in any case to use, this language is not the language, it's as we adopted the bill, not as it made it out of House appropriations, right?
This is how it came out of your bill, but then there is the subsection H that was added, which says,
Okay,
notwithstanding that section, you're not eligible unless it's funded. You could add a similar piece to the Senate committee if you would like.
I would think that you'd realize, everybody, this is kind of a holding thing. In other words, whatever we do, it's just to facilitate final resolution of this, which is going to depend on what Senate Finance does. And then when it comes back to House, what they do. We can't change that. In other words, they're going to decide whether to appropriate money for the people. Well, the people who are paid, all the people on here who work for the state, they're paid through their salaries. It's the few people, and there are some who are not. And the question is, are they going to be provided for or not? We can't control that. I would argue that we should leave into the Senate side the same language that's in here as Cameron recommends, just because it signals to the Senate Appropriations Committee that this is an issue they got to deal with. You see what I'm saying? We can't run it, but we can signal where we are. And I would propose, as a member of the committee, now not as chair, I would propose that, well, I am chair, but anyway, I would propose that we put this in the Senate bill, just let them know, guys, there's an issue there. Are you going to fund the non-state employees or not? And by the way, if you're asking the obvious question, I can tell it's on your mind. If you're asking the obvious question, what happens if they don't? My experience is these study committees go ahead and the people who are the nonprofits who ought to be compensated just feel like it's just another injustice they're facing and they attend.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do, Mr. Chair, is I'm gonna pause here because I can proceed in two directions. I can simply continue to walk through this side by side and you can continue to review what was in your bill and whether you want to include it again. Or I can stop and just switch to the Senate version and walk through their language.
Well, I think the side by side is great, but I don't think I think the side by side is good.
Okay, I'll just keep walking through this then. Okay,
And I think that until we get to, I mean, we're dealing with things that are in our bill and weren't in theirs or vice versa. Yeah.
so I can probably be somewhat a little more fast paced on some of these things simply because there's nothing to compare to. So section 5 of your bill, for example, is dealing with the CAMA data that would be provided to the tax department. And so this is just a question of whether or not you would like to, if you're going to do an amendment to S-127, whether you would like to include this as it passed your committee. The Senate committee took economic development, took testimony on this topic last Friday morning. And I haven't been directed of what to do of anything with that committee, but you know, I get the impression that they were understanding of what the intent here is, so.
Everybody remember what this is about? This was, I'm gonna refresh memories. What happened was, and Tom, actually, you can tell everybody what it's about because you presented this when we presented our housing bill.
Here's the other portion.
It's 17,
Landlord
way back,
certificates
yeah,
further down.
way back.
The idea of a short-term rental registry seemed to be duplicative and not real popular. This combines the data from two sources that already exist, provide essentially the same information. The one is the assessor database that's already maintained by municipalities, and the other is the landlord certificate, which is already in use, and the provision. Page 17. No.
Is it?
Well, there's the repeal. Okay, here we are. 17 is 18, so page 23. I think is the other section I'm looking for. There's a repeal of the provisions for the landlord certificate. And essentially we're in section 18, putting language back in is very similar, but provides the information, the additional information that we need. So this is in lieu of a landlord certificate, combining those two sources.
So the question for us is, in other words, what we discovered, as I remember, is these two sources, as Tom said, these two sources put together gave us a lot, if not almost all of the information that the rental registry would, and that DHCD reported that they could help combine this and produce the data that was necessary. I have received input on section, what is it again? Let me see.
The first part is section.
Section 18, the landlord certificate. Which, wondering whether the name of the renter was in some way going to produce and make public information that could be used by the federal government for adverse purposes. It's not, I haven't heard or understood enough to make it really any recommendation yet to the committee. So I think that issue, if it's a real one, we can deal with later. We'll have another chance.
And I will say on that topic, it doesn't preclude you having the conversation now. The name of the renter is what
It's what ties it to.
it's right here under number 1.
No,
There's the change.
They both have to include their SPAN number, school property account number. It's required on both, and that's the point of data that they can be.
Right. What I'm saying is under the changes to the landlord certificate right here, it's being changed to, it is requiring the name of each renter.
Each rental property certificate.
And I'm just saying that was made last year.
I think it's always required the name of who's renting his property.
It always required the name of the landlord, right, the property owner,
No, the tenant,
the tenant.
both.
Did it always?
To my knowledge, it's always, the form when I looked at it years ago, dude.
I think, I'm assuming without knowing that the reason it requires the name of the renter is that's how they tie it to, the whole purpose of this, not for us. For us, it was to generate information. The purpose of this originally and still is in order to facilitate in giving renters their renter credit. That's totally a function of their name.
Yeah.
But anyway, I would suggest that I just felt I wanted to mention that I was pulled over today to talk about this. We'll find out more. And if Joe tells us that we should change it, we will.
Yeah, we don't need to change it. We're asking for aggregated data.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily have to use that data in what we're collecting. They may need it for the credit.
So the issue really we're facing, Cameron, as I understand it, is do we want to keep in the CAMA section, which is in section 5? And we can also deal, and I guess we can deal with section 17. Is it section 17? What is it?
Yeah, the question is just, do you want to keep those sections in?
Yeah,
And
and
then 127 and incorporate those in, yeah.
I think, are we okay with that, members of the committee? Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So then the next question is, and this is gonna be on page 14 of your side by side. The Senate added in this section, which is section 4 of their bill. And it is a change to the rental housing revolving loan program. This was in the budget adjustment. And it would amend that program to allow VHFA to authorize annual increase in rent for subsidized units that have been built under this program to exceed 3% if authorized by the agency.
Does everybody remember, again, just to let you know? We got this request from VHFA in connection with the BAA. And they wanted us to recommend that it be put in the BAA. Now, we didn't write the BAA, House Appropriations did. So it went into our we decided to put it in our letter, to House Appropriations. And they put it, I think, in the BAA. This language is here because of what they considered a possibility, which appears to have materialized, that there will not be a BAA. That's not absolutely definitive, but you will see a lot in various places that various entities, agencies, and others who were forewarned of this possibility took some of their most vital information and stuck it somewhere else. And like, for example, in the draft budget in many cases. That's what this is. So we did give it affirmative nod when we sent the letter to House Approach. It's just repeated here, right? Am I right, Cameron?
It does not change from what was in the BA.
And this is on page. Where is it?
It's 14.
It's page 14, section 4, yes. So can we leave that in?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, is there anyone here in the audience who's here because they're waiting for a discussion of 169? Okay, because I don't know if that discussion is going to happen. We'll see. All right.
Okay. Section 7 of your bill. This is the bottom of page 14 of your side by side is the DHCD land bank report. So it's just a question of whether you want to keep that.
DHCD, as you remember, DHCD, you remember what this is about? This is about abandoned or decrepit housing. And the question is, there are various ways of dealing with decrepit, housing that's falling apart, abandoned, etc. For the purposes of the committee, since we may come back to this, there's more than what's in here. I mean, one can make it easier for towns to try to put parcel up for sale in a tax sale. If nobody pays their taxes on it and it's abandoned, you can make it, there is discussion of a vacant property tax, which is aimed at encouraging people, well, discouraging people from just an abandoning property and leaving it undeveloped. And then there's this, the land bank report came out a few weeks before, well, right while we were hearing.
It was in January.
Yeah, and it was aimed at the same thing. And so we decided to ask that this report be followed up with how are you going to fund it? What would it really look like? Maybe even some draft legislation.
Which if I recall, Commissioner Farrell mentioned that we're kind of gonna be doing that, whether you put that in there or not. So I don't think it hurts us at all to keep it in there.
Okay, keep it in. Is that all right? Any
Yes.
dissent? Okay.
Section 8, this is on page 15, so, I can. These are the appeals sections, so I can keep them in if you also choose at this point. Again, as you know, this is in my area, so. But section 8, 9, 10. 11. Are gonna be, and 11 ends on page 19, and these are your sections that this committee passed related to appeals that are not in the Senate version. So if you would like, we can bring those over into an amendment and add them back into 127.
This is, again, just to remind people, this is essentially eliminating the section that allowed 20 people to bring a lawsuit challenging development for whatever reason. And the section that said abutters could challenge, this replaces it with a standard of you have to be an aggrieved person, and it defines aggrieved person. Okay, seems to be, are you okay? Okay, carry through.
Page 19 of this side by side, the section 12 in your bill, 9 in the Senate bill is the Act 250 appeals study, and the language here is similar. So we will do that unless there's objection. There's no change to it. So then we get to the top of page 21, where you have a slight difference in the brownfield property cleanup program. This is subdivision C. When constructing any review required by the subchapter, the secretary shall prioritize the review of remediation at a site that contains housing. Your bill said, or that is planned for the construction or rehabilitation of single family or multifamily housing.
As I remember, this was just the committee saying, wait a minute, I can't remember who, somebody on the committee.
It was me, and that's why I think we should keep it in.
Well, if anyone feels obliged on that grounds to oppose it.
Well, it doesn't make sense. The way it's written in the Senate version, it's remediation of a site that contains housing. There's a lot of sites that could, that don't already. So yeah, I think it's.
Yes, Mary.
As an example, I have a really battered up house in my district that has been that way for at least 7 years. And went to tax sale, and the high school, which is feet from it, has purchased it for $1, but they don't plan to put housing on it. So then they would be left out of this.
Would it be a brownfield or
Nope,
is that
they wouldn't.
abandoned property?
Because there's a house.
There's a burnt out house on it.
Well, it contains housing now,
Contains
so
housing.
they're okay, man.
Yeah, either
You're
way.
okay?
Yeah.
But they're not planning on
Right. This is-
building another
It says
house.
or.
Just kill it.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
You wanted to make sure that it was more for the brownfields that don't currently have any housing on it. Was my understanding of our
Right.
conversation,
You know-
that we wanted to be able to allow remediation
Right.
for future housing. But if you currently have a house on it, you're already covered.
Yeah, I am forced to admit that I agree with Joe. Because actually in my district, there is a, yeah, it's not the first time. There is in my district an effort to develop property where a lot of people are gonna live who were flooded out. And all it is right now is a subdivision. It's gonna be a subdivision, so, there's no housing there now. So I think, Cameron, I think you have the sense of the committee that we're gonna go with our language and that they just damn well better agree with it.
I'll pass along the message,
Verbatim.
word for word.
Mhm.
Okay, section 14, the next, section 13 of the Senate bill is the same. This is the report that you all have requested, the Brownfields Process Improvement Report. And then the next section is similar in both bills, 14 and 15, section 14 and 15. And this is the FY 2024 funding where it's being moved from Department of Environmental Conservation to the Environmental Contingency Fund. And that language is the same in both bills. Assuming we're gonna keep up. Okay. That gets us to page 23, where based on our conversation earlier, the landlord certificates are 17 and 18, you all to keeping those. Which gets us to page 24, section 19, where you all had the language in the VHFA offsite construction report. Now, I will quickly comment that the Senate Appropriations, the House Appropriations Committee added this section 19A, which says that the report's not required if it's not funded. And the House budget proposal does not include funding for this. So the question I have for you all is how you would like to proceed with this.
For information of the committee. I've had several conversations with VHFA personnel. Chad isn't with us at the moment. He's out running down the question that Tom asked him, but I've talked to him and I've talked to Maura. The consensus is they're going to do the study, even though the $125,000, $250,000 that they, remember, she proposed 250. A number of us, myself included, were saying like, what? And then she testified at length about all the decisions they'd have to make and all the information they needed, et cetera. And so we left the 250 in. House approach took it out. So the question, she said, they have said they will do the study. They will find the resources to do it. It might get done slower. My own view, which now I'm just taking off my hat as chair, just as a member of the committee, my own view is we should leave it in. Because I think it indicates that we would like to see it done. And I think that's a good thing. Section 19A. I don't particularly like that the duty to implement it is contingent on it, but I don't know, I guess you have Cameron, we leave it in. What are your thoughts on that? Just to.
Yeah, if you, I mean, it says they shall do it, so, if you leave it in. One could argue that they have an obligation to do the report. What are the consequences of them failing to do it?
But if we leave it in with section 19A in there,
So that's where I get to 19A. Then it's, you're at least making a statement that this is policy that you would like to see move forward, recognizing that there's no legal obligation to do it if there's no funding attached to it. I can ask my team if there's different language that's been used in the past by maybe different committees when you're trying to. You could articulate, I guess, a kind of a purpose section and just say, it is. It is your intent that VHFA do this work. You could kind of re-articulate it and phrase it that way as opposed to a shall issue a report. That may be a
what
solution.
if we left, I'm just gonna throw this out. What if we left 19 as it is? And 20, we put. It's the intent that VHFA produce the report, if at all possible, semicolon, provided however.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to figure something.
See what I'm saying? That 19A would start off that it's our intent that they produce the report if at all possible, absent funding, semicolon, provided however. I guess the only disadvantage of that is that it does send a signal that they'll probably say that.
They'll probably what?
I was gonna say it sends a signal that they'll do it anyway, but they're gonna say they'll do it, so it doesn't matter.
The effective date, so, we'll have to tweak this because, we'll have to go with, the House version if you're going to include the Universal Design Study Committee and the repeal. I will also need to add, as you can see in the Senate version, there's section 4, which was the VHFA rental revolving loan fund and being able to charge more than 3% of the rent. That needs to go into effect on passage, so I'll have to combine these two for a new effective date to make those 3 sections on passage, everything else July 1, 2025. Okay, so, Mr. Chair, next question. We're on page 26, the side by side. This is where we're going to get into the provisions of S-127 that are not in H-479. These next few sections are specifically kind of associated with H-169. So I can kind of pause, move over these, and then we can come back to them, if that's what you would prefer.
I think let's do that. I just want to say to the committee, to clarify. We have before us the bill. The author of the bill includes our member, Representative Dodge, which we'll be discussing briefly today and then again later, which is S-160, H-169, which has to do with this adding immigration status or citizenship to fair housing and public accommodation sections, and has a lot of detail in it about social security numbers, et cetera. That's in S-169. H-169. What they're doing here is addressing the same issue, that all they do, very simply, it's a much more limited approach. What it does, I think we should just know that as we go into the discussion of H-169 later. All they do is in section, with respect to public accommodations, they add citizenship and immigration status. With reference to unfair housing, they just add citizenship. And that's what this is. What I think we should do And let's go, I think we should leave it for that, at
Okay.
that for now.
We'll go through the remainder of the bill and see where we're at and circle back.
Yeah, and I think, except we won't go through the tax increment financing. stuff.
Yes, sir. Okay. And so that's where I think we might be able to, we might be relatively on time. So I'm moving to section 10, so we're gonna circle back to section 8 and 9. So this is page 29 of your side by side. So here's where these next few sections are related to development soils, section 10 and 11. You all recall you had my also former supervisor Michael O'Grady in here not too long ago, where he walked you through this language about development soils and the development soils report.
This is the one where there's, remember, 3 different sections on brownfields in our bill. Well, out there, 2 of them in our bill. The 2 that we left in our bill were one that said when the brownfields folks look at projects, they have to give priority to housing projects. The second one was, and by 11/1 or 11/15, I can't remember which, they have to give us a study on how to make the process easier and faster. Okay. It's also in the language that and we went with their language. There was also in there management of development soils. The first time around, I took that out because I felt that it really dealt with a substantive brownfields issue, pollution control issue, over which we didn't have any expertise and we'd have to take all kinds of testimony. And there was just no time for it to go to environment. So the Senate, however, they weren't concerned with that issue. I think they ran it by, they might have done a flyover with Senate Environment. No, they didn't. Okay, they just.
Not to my recollection.
My understanding is that they had conversations with the chair of Senate Environment and she was
Fine with it.
fine with it, happy with it, and so she just kind of gave her blessing and off it went.
So that's why you see it in here. It's in the Senate bill. What I did is give this bill or sent it over to Amy, the chair, Amy Sheldon, the chair of House Environment, and said, what do you want to do? Do you want to do what Commerce is doing, which is just hold a hearing on it and let us know where you stand and we'll put it in as per you? Do you want to tell us no way? Do you want to tell us we'd have to take possession of it? Just tell us something, and that's where this stands. So what I would suggest is, though we did take testimony on it, that we just leave it for now. Is that okay? So we hear more? Okay.
Right. So that is section 10 and 11. So that moves us to page 31, which is, I'm going to pause because these next 2 sections, sections 16 and 17, deal with the project-based tax increment financing. So the community and housing infrastructure program. So I'm not gonna, you guys did a very quick walkthrough of this with John Gray, a few weeks back. So I can't really speak to this section. That's gonna bring us all the way to page 6, which I will also comment is not my area. This is Damian Leonard in our office covers this. I don't know if he's done a walkthrough of this section. He did. He came by. Okay. So, this was.
Is it Damien or is it somebody?
It would have been Damian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Magali, do you know?
So.
Did Damien come in and do a walkthrough of this section yet?
The fire,
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so he's done a walkthrough of that. This was added in the Senate version as a floor amendment at the request of the administration, with my understanding, Division of Fire Safety. So if you had questions for them, I would advise.
you remember, everybody, this was a situation, a technical amendment because fire alarms have evolved and they wanted the most up-to-date information about fire alarms.
Yeah, these sections, the only thing it's adding is it's adding, instead of saying only photoelectric only, it's saying photoelectric or UL 217. And then it's changing them from detectors to alarms. That's what it's doing throughout these entire few pages. So
So this is a cleanup thing. How's the committee feel about leaving this in?
Great.
okay, so that is where I'm gonna pause then, because you're wanting to keep this. We're keeping the development soils, haven't touched the project-based pieces. So I can pause here. I'll make sure I got through all of my thing. Yep. So, Mr. Chair, I could circle back around and we can begin discussion of the sections related to 169. You can.
I think the first thing
Pleasure.
this committee needs to do, thank you for your patience, everybody's take a break.
Yes.
Okay, so let's take